There are three ways in which ideas are principally revived. First, by the explicit revival. Second, by explicit reinstatement. And third, by implicit revival. In explicit revival, ideas come from the form of mental images and cause one to experience similar sensations to their original representation. One lives the past over again. In explicit reinstatement, ideas come to you with their original motor associations. You speak the words, go through the appropriate gestures, walk about, etc. In implicit revival, you recall the past indistinctly. You fail to remember many of the details from which accompanied the former experience. There is always a fringe which defies your efforts to pierce. Implicit revival plays a great part in our experience. It forms the greater part of all our recalling. It brings the past back to us in more or less a shadowy form and bids us calling upon our imagination to fill in the gaps that are missing. How to recall a fact. Now, this one is really, really good when you're getting down into working with products on the sales floor, as well as remembering who people are and remembering those kinds of stories. Now that the student has learned something of the nature of recall, he can understand better the modus operandi in recalling a fact to his memory. In trying to recall a fact, the first thing you must do is to pay a visit to its associates. The following is an example. Recalling a person's name. The general rule for recalling a person's name is think of as many things as you can associate or connect with that person. Thus you will think of his appearance, dress, walk, where he lives, his occupation, his friends. If these fail to bring his name to memory, you will think of where you saw him last, what he was doing, what he said, and so on. You thus go over everything connected with the man in the hope that some of the associates will bring his name to mind. In some cases, when you are trying to recall a person's name, you remember that it begins with a certain letter. In this case, it is usual to associate this letter with other letters of the alphabet. Thus, supposing you were sure your friend's name began with the letter B, the name recalled being Beatty, you would associate B with the vowels and consonants in alphabetical order, such as bay, bad, bag, beck, bed, beg, and so on, until possibly when you commenced the combination of B and T with the various vowels, and the B and the T would send the name flashing into your mind. Sometimes, while you were busy associating with the initial letter with other letter suggestions of other words will appear. Thus, in trying to remember the word Beatty, you will suddenly say, the name I want has something to do with striking. Then after a while, the word beating comes to suggest itself, and almost immediately, as you repeat the name Beatty, will stand out clear. In trying to remember the name of an author, many people find it helpful, where they know the title of one of his works, to try and picture what the book looks like, how it is bound and lettered, its price, the nature of its contents, where they saw it last. In this way, some association with the author's name is often found. If the above methods fail, it is best to leave the matter for a time and go on with some other work. Many people will adopt this plan with success. They find its spontaneous revival comes to their aid, and in the midst of totally unrelated ideas and circumstances, the man named flashes into consciousness. In recalling facts connected with the study, students are advised not to worry over the unremembered facts. To think of facts in this way in a vain attempt to bring them back to memory is to set up wrong associations, which will certainly cause you trouble over some future occasion. It is much better to go over the ground again than to indulge in guesses. Review your work, strengthen the associates of the facts you wish to remember, and you will get much better results. Many people cultivate trust in memory with remarkable success. They say to themselves, now I shall remember that next time that I want it. And they find that this trusting of the memory yields excellent results. It is well, too, in trying to recall, to think of any motor associations which accompanied the facts you wish to bring to mind. Some people find that if they walk about or talk aloud, that associates are aroused which help them to recall the facts desired. People who belong to the auditory type of memory find it distinct help in recalling to close their eyes. The brain is then shut off from visual impressions, and auditory images have a better chance of coming back to consciousness. Visuals sometimes adopt the same plan. Students should experiment and find which method of recall is most natural to them, and stick to that method in the future. So, in this case, you can use these exercises to be able to recall people's names easier or to recall the sensations of what it was that they were going through. An exercise for mental imagery. In all our remembering or our recalling, we mostly think in imagery. If you begin to think of a horse, you see it in mind. Your mental ear hears the noise it makes as it gallops along, and your mental eye sees it galloping. Perhaps you imagine also touching it at the close of its gallop. All this you imagine in mind. Similarly, you associate lightning with the sight of the flash, its swiftness, and the noise of thunder. But you never think of it in terms of the touch, smell, or taste. Now it has been found that all of us have our own peculiar method, or type, as it is generally called, of imagining in the mind, and in trying to remember, as we principally employ one type to bring into consciousness that which we seek to recall. There are three main types of imagery: the visual type, the auditory type, and the motor or modal type. The gustatory, or the olfactory, and the tactile types are less used, but nevertheless play their part in influencing recall. The visual type has a good memory for form and color, auditory for sounds, the modal for movement of every kind, gustatory for the taste of anything, the tactile for the sensations of touch, and the olfactory for smells of all kinds. The subject of mental imagery is of the greatest importance in the cultivation of memory, for it tells you which methods according to your type of imagery are best to employ in anything which you wish to learn, to make your own. People with strong visualization in recalling anything always see it. It is something they have read, they can see in their mind, the letters, the words, their appearance, the look of the page, etc. The auditory type remember by sound. All the time that they are reading, their mental ear is hearing the sound of each word and reproduces these when they seek to remember what they have read. The motor type remember by movement. In drawing, they follow the movement of the pencil. In silent reading, they are inclined to move their lips and even to whisper words. In reading aloud, they are apt to gesticulate, to sway their body, and to pose in various attitudes. It must not be imagined that we are all divided into these distinct types in the sense that we use one type and one only. This is erroneous. The generality of people use a complex of all these types in remembering. But the fact remains in that every person, one of these types predominates, and therefore it is important to know which type plays the greatest part in our life. And how to know which types of imagery predominates. Apart from the special apparatus of the psychological laboratory, it is not easy to determine with any preciseness the type of imagery predominating an individual. There are several experiments, however, which give what may be termed a good idea of each type. So experiment number 1. On the next page are 3 lists of words marked respectively A, B, and C. Read a list A aloud 3 times at a fixed rate and then put it to one side. Now take a sheet of paper and mark it A and write down as many of the words as you can remember. Next, read list B silently with your mouth closed, lips compressed to avoid any movement. Read 3 times and then write down what you remember, marking your list B. Now get a friend to write down a list of 12 words as in list C and let him read these over to you 3 times. You must yourself not have seen the list. The words must be different from those in list C, which is merely provided as an example, and then write down what you remember, marking your list C, a note of recalling in each of the words. So you are not to strive for a long time trying to reproduce the words. You should not take more than a minute or 2. So here's a copy of those lists. So in this, it's given list A as coat, song, race, sour, rough, noxious, shop, salt, shrill, cold, running, and smell. List B is given as girl, fluty, fight, perfume, hot, sweet, landscape, shriek, lightning flash, bitter, lukewarm, and aroma. List C's example provide as For example, poker, shrill, circle, putrid, uneven, delicious, zigzag, child, smooth, drum, taste, and stench. Now compare your lists and see which list gives the best resulting in recalling. If A gives the best results, then you're probably of the motor type. If it B, you're probably of the visual type. If it's C, you're probably of the auditory type. Note it is important to note the bearing that the immediate and primary memory may have your results in recalling the words in the above lists. And there's other sections as well that you can go back to and refer to in this work for motor memory, in time rate and reading and its effect on memory. Experiment number 2, practice the above method in learning poetry. Take verses of equal length and equal difficulty, read one verse aloud and another silently with the lips compressed, and the third gets a friend to choose to read aloud to you. See which method enables you to recall the best by writing out as much of each verse as you can remember after 3 readings. Continue experimenting as above until it is fairly clear which method gives you the best results. Experiment number 3. Go and watch some event, such as a football match or a baseball game, a race, a play, or look at a landscape, a street, scene, a crowd, and write a description of any of these sights and then carefully analyze them. Note which these things impressed in you the most, that is, things seen or heard or movement of any kind. Rewrite the scene a week after and note which class of facts you recall best. Note regarding visual memory, first that one of the best tests of visual memory is as follows. Try to spell long words backwards. If your visualization is strong, you'll be able to see the words standing out clear in your mind's eye, hence to read it backwards should not be difficult. Second, visuals have strong powers of local memory. Thus, if you look at a public clock and note the time afterwards, when you recall the time you passed the clock, the image of the clock will stand out clear, marking the time. So these are just some of the tricks that you can use in order to stimulate your memory recall as you are working with your customers, as you are trying to learn the products in your shop, as you are trying to figure out the tactile experience that you get from having those conversations. Now, in the case of the adult story, it was easier to do this because things vibrated, things wiggled, they moved, they had momentum on their own when you turned them on. It's that kind of a thing that makes it easier, the scent of the thing, the texture of it, what it does, and the conversation you have around the story in relation to it. So, hopefully this gives you some examples of what you can do. Here is a clearer list for you if you need to write these things down. So that way you have, for your unspoken portion, a list of words. Thank you for watching, and I hope that this helps in stimulating some techniques and tips for your memory recall when you're working with your employees. Alright, bye for now, y'all.